Good evening, everyone. Welcome to class 51. We're now deep into a study of the Baha'i faith, and we were going to stay there for quite some time. I was thinking it's something we've mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning again, that what we've done over this past year of classes is a journey through the Abrahamic religions, and it occurred to me simply because of the one of the upcoming classes we're going to have about Baha'u'llah's journey from Baghdad to Samsun and then the Constantinople. Took 110 days, and there's a whole chapter about 30 pages long in Balduzzi's book, his biography of Baha'u'llah, called Baha'u'llah, the King of Glory. And he calls it a journey. And of course, it is a journey. But I was thinking, really, it'd be nice if we thought of our classes as we proceed, that we ourselves are on a journey with Baha'u'llah, side by side with him, and understanding the things he experiences and goes through, as we also stop and examine particular events that occur along the way, and also, of course, examined not in vast detail as we did more deeply in the examination of the Book of Certitude, but for example, next week we will focus entirely, our class entirely, on the Tablet of the Holy Mariner, which is something that challenges a number of people because it's very poetic, it's an allegory, and therefore very figurative in nature. I hope you had a good holiday and holy days, plural, the commemoration of the Day of the Covenant, as well as the commemoration of the ascent of Abdul-Baha, and I hope you all had a chance to see the movie that was put together by the World Center called The Exemplar. It is magnificently done. And at the end of it, I'm sure you enjoyed the colorized video film of Baha'u'llah in New York. I mean, Abdul-Baha in New York. It's extremely moving. But the whole thing was really well put together. So let us begin the part of our journey tonight, which is to sort of review the journey that Baha'u'llah had, or the events in the Baghdad period, and to set up our study for next week on the Tablet of the Holy Mariner. So let me switch to my PowerPoint and share my screen with you. And I got kind of a long title tonight, that Towards the Climax of the Baghdad Period, the Historical Context of the Tablet of the Holy Mariner. What we're going to do tonight, in addition to sort of reviewing the four different parts of the Baghdad period, and we're not going to go over them in detail, but just to refresh our memories about what we've already looked at for the most part, but also some things that we have mentioned but haven't looked at in detail. And we'll look at just two or three of them in some detail. I hope you understand that what we're doing will in no wise suffice your own study as we go on our journey with Baha'u'llah, of following him on your own by reading at least these three works. The Baha'u'llah, the King of Glory, which is, I wouldn't say it's a definitive biography of Baha'u'llah, because definitive means that it's the be all and end all, and I doubt if we'll ever have a complete study, but this is the best so far, and it is extremely detailed. And among the things you will find either online as you look at the maps of Baha'u'llah's journeys and so on, is a list of every place that Baha'u'llah was and when he was there. So if you think of how much we don't know about, for example, the life of Christ, just 3 years of his ministry and not much detail there. Muhammad, we know a lot more about, but the chronology is fairly good. But with Baha'u'lláh, we know where he was every day of his life and what happened during those days. Shoghi Effendi, God Passes By, of course, is not meant to be a history book per se. It was a gift by the Guardian to the Baha'i world in commemoration of the centenary of the beginning of the faith. It came out in 1944, and he wrote a similar work in Persian. And it is an analysis of the Baha'i faith in chronological order. So it has history there, and it's sort of the first place you go if you want to find out what is the most important thing I need to know about this work. Well, he will perhaps in a sentence or two give you the heart of what the work is about or what its importance is. Tahirzadeh, the 4-volume work, is extremely valuable. And as the title implies, it's a history book, or it's history, but it's the revealed works in historical context. So it's what we're doing, only on a very detailed scale. So let's look at the 4 parts of the Baghdad period just very briefly to remind ourselves of what we've done so far, because of course we've spent 4 classes on the Book of Certitude, and that was not revealed until the year before the end of the period in 1862, a year before the departure of Baha'u'lláh in 1863. So you have the period, first of all, before he goes to Sulaymaniyah, before he leaves. And I'm mentioning here just a couple of important works that were revealed. He reveals the Tablet of All Food. There's an interesting story there, which we've mentioned before, but you can look that up in the books I've just mentioned if you want to understand why it's important. Suffice it to say, Baha'u'lláh then leaves unexpectedly and without any prefatory announcement on his part, and goes to the mountain wilderness of Sargarlu and around Sulaymaniyah in Iraqi Kurdistan. And it's important, though we mentioned it already when we went over the Igan, he states that his reason for departure was to avoid becoming a subject of discord among the faithful, a source of disturbance, and to our companion, the means of injury to any soul, or the cause of sorrow to any heart. Beyond these, we cherish no other intention, and apart from them, we had no end in view. So there's your reason why he left, if anyone asks you why. You can say, well, it's parallel, as the Guardian does, to Christ going into the wilderness for 40 days, or various other periods in the lives of manifestations where they prepare themselves for what's about to occur. But his real reason was that the more he tried to do, the more Mirza Yahya accused him of usurping Mirza Yahya's status as nominee of the Bab. Then 1866, Baha'u'lláh returns to Baghdad on March 19th. He rebuilds the community, and that's very important. The whole description of that, we're going to read just a portion of that tonight, but it's so interesting what he accomplishes. And of course, the community at this point is the Bábi community, because Baha'u'lláh has not announced that he is the one whom the Bab has foretold. But he reveals an amazing amount of works during this period. And you're probably familiar with this if you're familiar with the Baha'i history, but it's interesting to recall all the same. The revelation of so many works that Baha'u'lláh ordered, it should be Mirzaka Jan, his amanuensis, to have some destroyed by throwing them into the Tigris. The enormous expansion in the scope and volume of Baha'u'llah's writings after his return from Sulaymaniyah is yet another distinguishing feature of this period under review. Then you have the final period, 1863, when he reveals one among the works he revealed in the third part of this period was, of course, the Kitab-i-Gan, the Book of Certitude. Then the final part of it, the climax, is what we're going to look at, focus in on tonight. Concludes with the fact that he foreshadows what is going to occur in the future with the revelation of the tablet of the Holy Mariner. Now, in what way does it do that? In other words, when? Well, we'll get to that later. The description of how much he revealed during the Baghdad period is very interesting to read. Just these two paragraphs from God Passes By. So let me read them to you. The verses that streamed during those years from his pen described as copious rain by himself, whether in the form of epistles, exhortations, commentaries, apologies, dissertations, prophecies, prayers, odes, or specific tablets, contributed to a marked degree to the reformation and progressive unfoldment of the Bábi community, to the broadening of its outlook, to the expansion of its activities, and to the enlightenment of the minds of its members. So prolific was this period that during the first 2 years after his return from his retirement to Sulaymaniyah, according to the testimony of Nabil, and Nabil is the historian who wrote the Dawnbreakers, who was at that time living in Baghdad, the unrecorded verses that streamed from his lips average in a single day and night the equivalent of the Quran. Isn't that incredible? I'll read that again. In a single day, he wrote the equivalent, a day and night, the equivalent of the length of the Quran. As to those verses, whether he either dictated or wrote himself, their number was no less remarkable than either the wealth of material they contained or the diversity of subjects to which they referred. A vast and indeed the greater proportion of these writings were, alas, lost irretrievably to posterity. No less an authority than Mirza Khajan, Baha'u'llah's amanuensis, affirms, as reported by Nabil, that by express order of Baha'u'lláh, hundreds of thousands of verses, mostly written by his own hand, were obliterated and cast into the river. And you ask why he would do such a thing. Well, this next paragraph explains it. Finding me reluctant to execute his orders, Mirza Khajan has related to Nabil, Baha'u'lláh would reassure me, saying, none is to be found at this time worthy to hear these melodies. Not once or twice, but innumerable times was I commanded to repeat this act. A certain Muhammad Karim, a native of Shiraz, who had been a witness to the rapidity and the manner in which the Bab had penned the verses with which he was inspired, has left the following testimony to posterity after attaining during those days the presence of Baha'u'lláh and beholding with his own eyes what he himself had considered to be the only proof of the mission of the promised one. I bear witness that the verses revealed by Baha'u'lláh were superior in the rapidity with which they were penned, in the ease with which they flowed, in their lucidity, their profundity, and sweetness to those which I myself saw pour from the pen of the Bab when in his presence. Had Baha'u'lláh no other claim to greatness, this were sufficient in the eyes of the world and its people, that he produced such verses as have streamed this day from his pen. And of course, if you'll recall in our study of the Kitab-i-Gan, this is the first and foremost proof of the manifestations, is the utterances that they reveal. Now, of course, I'm two things here. I hope you don't infer from this that this is anyway a derogatory or lessening of the respect we have from the Bab. Remember, each manifestation does what is required or for him, from him, during the time he appears, and also what people are able to accept. So there's the reason why he did it. And of course, another obvious but nonetheless noteworthy thought to mention here is one other thing this demonstrates is there's so much we have yet to know. And this comes in the light of the fact that thousands of Baha'u'llah's writings are in our possession, which are yet to be translated into English. So this gives you an idea of not only the scope and profundity of the writings of Baha'u'lláh as a proof of his station, but it also gives you an idea that there's so much more to come, that we won't be ready during this dispensation for the things that he had revealed. So it should make us very excited. Some of the major works revealed, the most well-known we've already mentioned, the 7 Valleys, the 4 Valleys, the Hidden Words. And this is so interesting. And this was new to me, or I say it's new to me. A lot of things I learn and then I forget that I learned them. Abdul-Baha writes his commentary on the Hadith of the Hidden Treasure in 1861. He was only 17 years old. And this is one of the more, it's been provisionally translated and you can have access to it online. It is one of the more profound doctrinal works, or not doctrinal really, but cosmological, theoretical cosmology discourses that we have in the faith. It's remarkable. So this gives us a sense of the one whose life we have celebrated this year and whose passing we commemorated a few days ago. I also commend to you the letter from the House of Justice containing the remarks that were made in commemoration of that event at the World Center. And of course, the Igan. And a note here that we've already mentioned before, that this was in the hand of Abdul-Baha and probably the first work of Baha'u'llah's to appear in print. And then finally, other revealed works associated with this period were his interpretation of the letter Vav, mentioned in the writings of Sheikh Ahmad Oqsa'i, and other abstruse passages in the works of Sayyid Kazim Rashdi. These are the 2 forerunners of the Bab, if you'll remember. The Tablet of the City of Unity, and a host of other writings in the form of epistle, odes, homilies, specific tablets, commentaries, and prayers, contributed each in its own way to the swell of the rivers of everlasting life, which poured forth from the abode of peace, and that's a title given to Baghdad, and lent a mighty impetus to the expansion of the Bab's faith in both Persia and Iraq, quickening the souls and transforming the character of its adherents. So he is revealing these tablets. Of course, they are of his revelation, and yet he's also at the same time, and this is something we'll come to class after next, he's also having transcribed and disseminated the works of the Bab. And this is something that's very important, as you will see, as he begins his journey from Baghdad to Constantinople. You will understand what I'm talking about. So again, I can't give you all the details that are in these vast chapters on the Baghdad period, but one of the many anecdotes, and there's so many exciting stories in the life of Baha'u'lláh, especially during these early times. When he gets to Akka, not so many stories, because he secludes himself purposefully at Baji, or either he's in prison or he's at Baji, and he is revealing works, voluminous works, all that time. But his life is pretty static at that point. Not entirely. I mean, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But insofar as plot is concerned, if you look at the journey of Bahá'u'lláh, there's not so much of this sort of really interesting events or stories that occur that we have here in Baghdad and then later in Adrianople. There are some, and there certainly where we'll cover them. This is interesting because it's the representatives from Persia were immediately contacted by the divines, the ulama in Baghdad, to try to get Baha'u'lláh removed because he was having such an influence on the people. And so they decided they would challenge Baha'u'lláh to perform a miracle. And so this is that story told in brief. Frustrated, and this is from God Passes By. Frustrated in their designs, but unrelenting in their hostility, the assembled divines delegated the learned and devout Haji Mullah Hassani Amnu, recognized for his integrity and wisdom, to submit various questions to Baha'u'lláh for elucidation. When these were submitted and answers completely satisfactory to the messenger were given, Haji Mullah Hassan, affirming the recognition by the ulama of the vastness of the knowledge of Baha'u'lláh, asked as an evidence of the truth of his mission for a miracle that would satisfy completely all concerned. Although you have no right to ask this, Baha'u'lláh replied, for God should test his creatures and they should not test God. Still, I allow and accept this request. But here are the conditions under which he accepted it. The ulama must assemble and with one accord choose one miracle and write that. And after the performance of this miracle, they will no longer entertain doubts about me, and that all will acknowledge and confess the truth of my cause. Let them seal this paper and bring it to me. This must be the accepted criterion. If the miracle is performed, no doubt will remain for them, and if not, we shall be convicted of imposture. Well, isn't that incredible? And so what happens? This clear, challenging, and courageous reply, unexampled in the annals of any religion, and addressed to the most illustrious Shia divines, assembled in their time-honored stronghold, was so satisfactory to their envoy that he instantly arose, kissed the knee of Baha'u'lláh, and departed to deliver his message. 3 days later, he sent word that the august assemblage had failed to arrive at a decision and had chosen to drop the matter, a decision to which he himself later gave wide publicity in the course of his visit to Persia, and even communicated it in person to the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mirza Said Khan. Now you can say, well, so he didn't really perform a miracle, but it's clear that he would have. There are a number of times where he says that. If you'll recall in the Book of Certitude, he said, I wish that the Book of Certitude, yes, where he talks about alchemy. Remember, we talked about that. And he actually said, I wish someone had challenged me to perform this, because in effect, he says, I could have done it. Baha'u'lláh is reported to have commented, when informed of their reaction to this challenge, through this all-satisfying, all-embracing message which we sent, revealed and vindicated the miracles of all the prophets, inasmuch as we left the choice to the ulama themselves, undertaking to reveal whatever they would decide upon. If we carefully examine the text of the Bible, Abdu'l-Baha has written concerning a similar challenge made later by Baha'u'lláh in the Lois Sultan, we see that the divine manifestation never said to those who deny him, whatever miracle you desire, I am ready to perform, and I will submit to whatever test you propose. But in the epistle to the Shah, Baha'u'lláh said clearly, gather the ulama and summon me that the evidences and proofs may be established. So you can say, well, he is omniscient, so therefore he knew they wouldn't be able to come to agreement, or that else they were afraid that what if he did it, then they'd have to become Baha'is or Babis. So that would be miraculous as well, would it not? Lovely, lovely story. And there's several of them. One where he's threatened to be killed with a man who has a gun, and the man drops the gun to the ground when he looks into Baha'u'llah's eyes, and Baha'u'llah commands that one of his servants who's with him to pick up the gun and hand it back to the man. Well, the next couple of paragraphs, again from God Passes By, are about the Reformation, some of the specific things that were done in the Bábi community. Because at the end of this period we're discussing tonight, not only did the governor not want Baha'u'lláh to leave, but the people of Baghdad did not. They had come to love not only Baha'u'lláh, but the Bábi community itself, because they were honorable and trustworthy, and tried relentlessly to maintain a spiritual demeanor and comportment. And this paragraph describes that. The result of 7 years of consolidation and restoration, 1856 to 63. 7 years of uninterrupted, of patient and eminently successful consolidation were now drawing to a close. A shepherdless community, initially they were, subjected to a prolonged and tremendous strain from both within and without, and threatened with obliteration, had been resuscitated and risen to an ascendancy without example in the course of its 20 years history. Its foundations reinforced, its spirit exalted, its outlook transformed, its leadership safeguarded, its fundamentals restated, its prestige enhanced, its enemies discomfited. The hand of destiny was gradually preparing to launch it on a new phase in its checkered career, in which weal and woe alike were to carry it through yet another stage in its evolution. And that stage is the stage we will be looking at as Baha'u'lláh goes on his journey to Constantinople, is there only a few months. And then we have Adrianople, where you have drama upon drama, all of which we will examine. The deliverer, the sole hope, and the virtually recognized leader of this community, who had consistently overawed the authors of so many plots to assassinate him, who had scornfully rejected all the timid advice that he should flee from the scene of danger, who had firmly declined repeated and generous offers made by friends and supporters to ensure his personal safety, who had won so conspicuous a victory over his antagonists. He was at this auspicious hour being impelled by the resistless processes of his unfolding mission to transfer his residence to the center of the still greater preeminence, the capital city of the Ottoman Empire, the seat of the Caliphate, the administrative center of Sunni Islam, the abode of the most powerful potentate in the Islamic world, which was the Sultan Abdulaziz. So the climax of the Baghdad period in 1863. In January, the governor of Baghdad, Namik Pasha, received the first of 5 commands from the Grand Vizier of Turkey to transfer Baha'u'lláh to Constantinople. And there would be 4 more after that. And so the governor, again, was so enamored of Baha'u'lláh and what he had accomplished and the benign influence he had on the entire city, that he didn't tell Baha'u'lláh about this, nor anyone else, so far as I know. In March, now this is again 1863, January, now we're 3 months later in March, 2 months later, Bahá'u'lláh celebrates the 2-week festival of Nowruz at a farm along the Tigris near his house in Baghdad. The most great house, a place of pilgrimage. It's now destroyed, but the guardian's foresight about such eventualities is something I wanted to mention, and that is, once when I was at Greenacre giving a course, there was a young man in his late 20s, I believe, who had come from Iraq, where he had, in his earlier youth, on behalf of, well, I think he was in his 30s at this point, on behalf of the Guardian, he was one among many who was charged by the Guardian to go to every holy place in the Baha'i world, including the house of the Bab and this house, the most great house in Baghdad, and not only take pictures and measurements and so forth, but to map out every detail of blueprints of the place, knowing full well that in the course of time, most likely these places would be destroyed by the Muslims, and their research that they did would then enable the Baha'i community, once these lands are free, to rebuild these holy places exactly as they were before, not with the same material, of course, but nevertheless, they would be secured, and so they're not lost, and they will then remain, they will still become a place of pilgrimage. You may know, I know my brother and his wife went on pilgrimage to Shiraz and saw the house of the Bab, and went there before it was destroyed. You probably know many Baha'is who also had that privilege. Then the 5th day of Nowruz. Now, Nowruz, which means, of course, New Year or New Day, is not strictly a Baha'i thing or a Bábi thing. So, I mean, this was the 5th day of Nowruz means the 5th day after Nowruz. But a Yamiha, which occurs at the same time, is, excuse me, a Yamiha occurs before the 19-day fast, and then at the end of the fast you have Nowruz, but it's at the same date. So on the 5th day of Nowruz, Baha'u'lláh reveals the tablet of the Holy Mariner. Immediately after Mirza Khajan recites it, Baha'u'lláh orders tents to be folded up. Now, they were on a picnic out in the country, and we'll see that description. And so everything, in effect, in the eyes of the believers, they knew they felt like everything was fine and would remain that way. They had no clue that something ominous was about to occur. But when Mirza Khajan emerges out of Baha'u'llah's tent and recites the tablet of the Holy Mariner, they know that hard times are upon them, or upon Baha'u'lláh at least, and they are in tears and are very distraught. And sure enough, before they can leave, a messenger arrives from the governor, Namik Pasha, summoning Baha'u'lláh to the government house, where he will be officially told he must go to Constantinople. Now, here again, Baha'u'lláh foreknows that this is going to happen. So he reveals the tablet of the Holy Mariner, even though he has not yet received the message. In April, a large number of a large number visit Baha'u'lláh upon learning he must leave. whereupon Mirza Yahya flees, abandons the writings of the Bab, and this is what I was referring to. Baha'u'lláh had charged him with transcribing the writings of the Bab, which he helped to do. But he told him to take the writings back to Persia and to disseminate them among the believers there. Instead, Mirza Yahya leaves the writings of the Bab and travels in disguise to Constantinople. And you'll see more about that as we discuss the trip because it shows the nature of the man and his lack of respect for the charge he had been given. So we then come at the end of the climax of the Baghdad period, of course, is the declaration of Baha'u'lláh, April 22nd through March 3rd, 12-day festival in the Garden of Rizwan. So we'll look at the parts of that. This is one of the tents of Baha'u'lláh. And so when it talks about folded up the tents, this is the sort of tent that they would have had in the country when they were on their countryside enjoyment of the Nowruz festival. And this is also the kind of tents they would have had at the Garden of Rizwan. So what is it the believers understood when they heard the tablet of the Holy Marinate chanted to them that we today may not understand so well? In other words, if you didn't know this historical context, you wouldn't have any clue as to what this was really talking about. I mean, you'd get the ominous tone of it for sure, but you wouldn't understand that it's referring to explicitly to a certain number of events that are going to occur later on in Adrianople. Some of the, well, the direst events that occur in the life of Baha'u'lláh in many respects. So this marks the end of the dispensation of the Bab as soon as he officially announces himself. Now, there is, as I've said before, really three occasions where Baha'u'llah's declaration occurs. One is the private one where the has the vision of the Uri, of the Maiden of Heaven in the Siachal in 1853. 52. And then the second one is this one in the Garden of Rizwan, where he reveals his station to the believers who are with him. And then the third one will occur in Adrianople when he will reveal himself to publicly what is called the proclamation of Baha'u'lláh to the kings and rulers of the world. Now, this is interesting for a particular reason that I like to mention, because it fulfills the request of the Bab, and let me show you how. From a second tablet to him who will be made manifest, and that's the phrase that the Bab uses to refer to Baha'u'lláh. This is a letter from God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. This is a quote from that tablet. Unto God the Almighty. So this is a letter from God to God. And that's really lovely because, again, remember in the Kitab-i-Gan, Baha'u'lláh says, if the manifestations say that they are God, they're telling the truth. If they say they're simply a messenger of God, that is also the truth. Because in the station of absolute unity, they are as much of God as we can understand. In their station of distinction, they are messengers with individual personalities, come at individual times in history with a particular ministry to fulfill. So this is a letter from God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting, unto God, the Almighty, the best beloved. So this is a letter from the Bab to Baha'u'lláh, to affirm that the Bayan and such as bear allegiance to it are but a present from me unto thee, and to express my undoubting faith that there is no God but thee, that the kingdoms of creation and revelation are thine, that no one can attain anything save by thy power, and that he whom thou hast raised up is but thy servant and thy testimony. I indeed beg to address him whom God shall make manifest by thy leave in these words. And this is the crux of the matter. Shouldst thou dismiss the entire company of the followers of the Bayan in the day of the latter resurrection, and the latter resurrection, again, is the appearance of Bahá'u'lláh, by a mere sign of thy finger, even while still a suckling babe, thou wouldst indeed be praised in thy indication. And though no doubt is there about it, do thou, and this is his loving request to Baha'u'lláh, do thou grant a respite of 19 years as a token of thy favor, so that those who have embraced this cause may be graciously rewarded by thee. Thou art verily the Lord of grace abounding. Thou dost indeed suffice every created thing and causes it to be independent of all things, while nothing in the heavens or on the earth or that which lieth between them can ever suffice thee. Now, here is the math. The Bab is talking about the year 9 is supposed to be the end of his revelation. Of course, he is executed in 1850. But he asked for, so 1853 was intended to be the end of his dispensation. And of course, that's the time when Baha'u'lláh receives the first intimation of his revelation in the Siyah. But if you add 19 to that, to 1844, instead of the 9, you get 1863. And so this is the fulfillment of that request by the Bab. 3 declarations then, as I said, one in the Siyah, that is private and internal, the other to followers and family, and the third will be in Adrianople to the world at large via their leaders and governments. The third declaration would occur in Adrianople. Oh, that's a repetition. So that's the historical context for us to use as we approach the tablet of the Holy Mariner and ask ourselves, what is this describing that so terrifies the believers when Mirza Khajan comes out of the tent and recites it? What is its symbolic meaning or allegorical meaning? Both terms work very well. And that's what we'll discuss next time, why that work is so important and what does it mean.